Somewhere in the next month, somebody who cares about you is going to text you a screenshot, a headline, and it is going to tell you that the protein you eat is quietly hurting you. This year, the target is your kidneys. A couple years ago, it was cancer. Before that, your bones. And you wait a while and it's going to be your liver or your heart. It's the same story every few years, just pointed at a different organ. So I'll give you the answer now and then spend the rest of the episode defending it. If you're a healthy adult, you can't eat enough protein to really damage your kidneys, feed a cancer, weaken your bones, or turn a big meal into body fat. The amount it would take to do real harm is so far past what any human actually eats that you couldn't really get there if you tried. Now, every one of those fears does start from something real. There's a genuine physiological mechanism within the body behind each one. The problem is that somebody took that mechanism and ran it straight to a terrifying conclusion with no clinical outcomes underneath it. You'll see that move again and again. A real mechanism extrapolated way past what the evidence really supports. I call it mechanistic masturbation, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. And while the whole internet argues about whether you're eating too much protein or too little, almost nobody stops to ask the question that actually matters. Why are we arguing about one nutrient in isolation at all? I'm Dr. Jordan Feigenbaum, and this is the Barbell Medicine Podcast. There are four big fears about protein, and we're going to take all four of them apart, one at a time. One is that it wrecks your kidneys. Two, that it feeds cancer. Three, that it weakens your bones. And four, the one that sounds the most scientific, that your body can only use 20 or 30 grams at one sitting, so the rest is wasted or stored as body fat. Not one of them holds up once you actually read the studies behind it. And I want to leave one fact with you right now, because it tells you almost everything about how these studies work. The single most famous study behind the idea that protein feeds cancer also found that, after age 65, the people eating the most protein had the least cancer. Same study, same table. We'll get there. But first, let's start with the kidneys, because it is the oldest version of the scare and the one with the most real medicine behind it. There are really two questions in here, and they have different answers. So let's take them one at a time. What protein does to a healthy kidney, and what it does to a kidney that already has some disease. Here's what actually happens when you eat protein. Your body breaks it down into its constituent amino acids, just the amino acids that it's made out of, and it uses what it needs to build and repair, and is left with some nitrogen to get rid of. It packages that nitrogen into a waste product called urea. Your kidneys filter the urea out of your blood, and you pass it in your urine. Eat more protein, and your kidneys filter a little faster to keep up. That filtration speed has a name, and it's called glomerular filtration rate, or GFR, and is the main number we use to judge how well a kidney is working, unless we do a more extensive workup. Now, there's a wrinkle here almost nobody hears about. We rarely measure GFR directly. We estimate it, usually from a blood marker called creatinine, and creatinine is a breakdown product of muscle. It goes up when you carry more muscle in general, and it goes up for a day or two after you eat a big steak or start taking creatine. So a lean, muscular person, or anyone who ate meat before their blood draw, or someone who just started taking creatine monohydrate, well, they can show a lower estimated GFR, and it kind of looks like their kidneys are failing when nothing has actually changed. Part of the protein wrecks your kidneys signal is that measurement quirk, rather than any real damage. So where did the scare come from? Decades ago, researchers took animals, removed most of one kidney, and watched the small piece that was left work harder and eventually wear out. This gave us the hyperfiltration hypothesis, the idea that making a kidney filter harder ages it faster. More protein, more filtering, more wear. On paper, seems like a reasonable worry. And in 1982, that animal idea became a human recommendation in one famous paper in the New England Journal of Medicine by Brenner and colleagues. They argued the same hyperfiltration was slowly damaging human kidneys, and that we should cut protein to protect them. That single paper launched decades of low-protein diets for kidney patients. It's a perfect example of the thing I told you to watch out for. A mechanism became medical advice years before anyone had the outcomes to justify it. So let's test that in healthy people. In 2018, a meta-analysis in the Journal of Nutrition pooled 28 controlled trials, more than 1,300 adults with normal kidneys, higher protein against lower. The higher arms were up around 1.5 to 2 grams per kilo of body weight or more. The lower arms sat near the old RDA, around 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram body weight. Now, the fair knock on these trials is that they're short, mostly weeks to a couple of years and not decades. So hold that in mind while we go through them. But across that time period, the higher protein groups did filter faster, and their actual kidney function didn't decline at all. The kidney did more work, the way any healthy organ does when you ask more of it, and it held its own. Now, you see the same thing in people you would recognize. In one study, resistance trained men ate more than 3 grams of protein per kilogram body weight, over 300 grams of protein a day for a 200-pound guy. And they tracked them for a full year, and their kidney markers, their liver enzymes, and blood lipids didn't move at all. It's a small study, just 14 dudes, and they reported their own food, so it's not proof on its own, but it does agree with the larger review. Now, the part that actually matters clinically. The largest long-term look at this followed about 1,600 women for 11 years. In the women who started with normal kidneys, higher protein had no link to any decline in kidney function. But in a smaller group who already had mild impairment at the start, meaning that their filtration was already somewhat reduced, higher protein, and animal protein in particular, tracked with a faster drop in their GFR. Now, there's a reason that makes mechanistic sense. A healthy kidney carries huge reserves, far more filtering capacity than it needs on a given day. So a little extra work is nothing. A kidney that has already lost units is running the survivors closer to their limit just to keep up. So asking for more may lean on tissue that is already maxed out. Still, this is an observational study, so it can't really prove that protein did anything, and animal protein is not a clean variable on its own. In these data sets, a lot of animal protein typically rides along with a low-quality diet. More processed food, more of everything that comes with it, added sugars, added sodium, so on and so forth. So even here, the truth is that a lousy dietary pattern is doing a lot of the work that we keep pinning on protein. Which brings us to real kidney disease. Chronic kidney disease means the kidneys have been losing function for months or years, usually staged by how far the filtration rate has fallen. The logic here is reasonable. If more protein makes a damaged kidney work harder, then cutting protein should protect it. That is why low-protein diets have been prescribed to kidney patients for decades. So, does it actually work? The biggest test we have is a 1994 trial called MDRD, the Modification of Diet in Renal Disease Study. 840 patients with real chronic kidney disease, protein was cut hard, the main comparison taking people down to about 0.6 grams per kilogram body weight against a usual intake of near 1.3 grams of protein. And again, this was tracked for years. The main result, the one the study was built to find, came back with no significant benefit. The low protein group didn't decline meaningfully slower, and there was no reduction in how many people reached dialysis or died. The study everyone remembers as proof that cutting protein saves kidneys didn't actually show that. Now, to be fair, there was a hint in the details. The most aggressive arm slowed decline a little, but it fell short of statistical significance, a p-value of 0.07, which means we can't rule out that it happened by chance. It's a maybe, and it's unlikely to be clinically meaningful, and you don't build a medical recommendation on a maybe. The most recent word is a 2020 Cochrane review, 17 trials of about 3,000 patients. A moderate low-protein diet, around 0.6 to 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram body weight, the kind of thing a person can actually live on, made little or no difference in whether patients reached dialysis and no difference in whether they died. Only when you pushed all the way down to a very low-protein diet, about 0.3 to 0.4 grams of protein per kilogram body weight, did you see a real reduction in progression to dialysis. Now, for a normal-sized adult, that's roughly 30 grams of protein for the entire day, which is almost nothing. And to hit it, you would basically be living on sugar and fat. And even that only delayed dialysis. It didn't help anyone live longer. It delayed the machine. Nothing more. Now, a good nephrologist would stop me right there because MDRD and that Cochrane review were mostly in people without diabetes. And diabetes is the #1 cause of kidney disease in this country. In people with diabetic kidney disease, cutting protein under 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram body weight does track with the slower decline in GFR and less protein spilling into the urine. And the clear signal is in people with type 1 diabetes. Type 2, which is the far more common cause, well, the case is much weaker. But here's what I can't unsee, and I'll say up front, this is not my lane. I'm not a nephrologist, and there's certainly some nuance here. Still, every time I look at this, it kind of smells funny. The people who actually managed to cut their protein also changed their entire diet. They lost weight, they dropped sodium, they cleaned up the whole dietary pattern. I find it very hard to believe the protein number itself is the thing that helped, rather than everything else that came with lowering it. The condition is mostly what it is, and a better diet probably helps, and that better diet happens to be lower in protein for these folks. But it doesn't make protein the lever. And I'm not really out in left field here. In 2022, 3 nephrologists published a piece in the Journal of the American Society of Nephrology and titled it, bluntly, Protein Restriction for Kidney Disease. It's time to move on. They go through these same trials and conclude that the guidelines overstate the evidence, and they land on the point that runs through this entire episode. When you look at what actually tracks with the kidneys failing, it comes down to red meat specifically. In a study of 63,000 people, red meat raised the risk of kidney failure in a dose-dependent way, while total protein did not, and neither did poultry, fish, eggs, or dairy. It's the same story as the cancer segment we're going to get to. The red meat and the dietary pattern it comes along with was doing most of the work. And one more point from those authors. Almost all of the low-protein diet research was done before the drugs we now use to actually protect the kidneys, the ACE inhibitors and ARBs, and the newer SGLT2 inhibitors. So whatever small benefit protein restriction might once have had is even smaller today, layered on top of treatments that actually work. And even where cutting protein moves something, we got to look at what it moves. A slower change in GFR and less protein in the urine are surrogate markers, numbers on a lab report. What a patient actually cares about, living longer, staying off dialysis, feeling well enough to have a life, mostly doesn't change. And quality of life usually is not even measured. On top of that, almost nobody stays on a low-protein diet once they leave the office. A benefit that only exists on paper from a diet almost no one can follow doesn't really seem like a big benefit. And step back for a second, because this is the part that really gets me. The whole framing is that you can eat all the protein you want unless your kidneys are bad. But why are the kidneys bad? Usually because of the same metabolic mess, the diabetes, the blood pressure, the dietary pattern that we should have been talking about the entire time. Zeroing in on the protein number in someone whose kidneys are already failing is kind of like arguing about the deck chairs on the Titanic. And most people flagged with early kidney disease aren't headed for dialysis at all. For a middle-aged person with stage 3 chronic kidney disease, the lifetime risk of kidney failure is in the single digits. Which isn't zero, but we're asking them to give up the food they love for years to maybe delay something that the large majority were never going to reach. Now, there's an old line in nephrology quoted at the very top of that same piece we were talking about. All a low-protein diet does is shrink the patient down to the size of his kidneys. And cutting protein isn't free. These are often older patients who are already losing muscle, and strength and physical function predict who stays independent, who avoids a fall and a fracture, and who lives longer better than almost any number on any lab report. When you push their protein down to protect a lab value, buffing the chart, you can speed up the muscle loss that shapes the rest of their life. And if someone truly has to restrict their protein, that is the exact person who should be lifting. A 2001 randomized trial out of Tufts put older patients with kidney disease on a low-protein diet and had half of them do resistance training. The ones who trained built muscle and got stronger on that same protein-restricted diet. The ones who only did the diet, well, they lost strength. It's the same low protein for both groups. The training is what protected the muscle. That fits what we actually know about aging muscle. Older muscle does respond a little less to dietary protein on its own, what we call anabolic resistance, but that is mostly not about aging itself. It's driven by the medical conditions and the inactivity that pile up as people get older, and it's worse when those two are combined. Fix the inactivity and a lot of it's going to improve. Eating more protein helps a little, loading the muscle helps a lot. So an older patient with kidney disease is really managing two problems at once: the kidney with their nephrologist and the muscle in the gym. And most older adults have the opposite problem entirely. The expert consensus is now that they need more protein than the old guidelines say, up around 1.2 grams per kilogram body weight and beyond, just to hold on to the muscle as they age. They don't need less protein. Advanced kidney disease is the real exception, and even there, the muscle still needs training. So the kidneys, in a healthy adult, protein doesn't damage them, and the large studies we have all agree on that. Now, in someone whose kidneys are already diseased, it becomes a real careful conversation with a nephrologist, weighed against muscle and quality of life. But even there, I suspect the protein number matters far less than the dietary pattern it's attached to. Either way, it's a universe away from a healthy adult being told that their protein shake is dangerous. Every few episodes, someone asks if eating more protein is going to wreck their kidneys. Now, for most people, the data on that is very reassuring, but lead in your drinking water is a different conversation. The EPA and CDC agree there is no known safe level of lead exposure. The EPA's health-based goal for lead in drinking water is 0, and we're nowhere close to that. The problem is that there are millions of lead service lines still in the ground across the country. So the pipes, the solder, and the plumbing between the treatment plant and your faucet break down over time, and that's how lead gets into the tap water. There's a federal mandate to replace them, but it's on a 10-year timeline, and most of that work hasn't started yet. In adults, chronic low-level lead exposure has been linked to all sorts of things like kidney damage, high blood pressure, and cardiovascular disease. And these are claims from the WHO and CDC's position. And the thing is, you'd never know from looking at your water or tasting it. So that's why I've started filtering my water with Cove Pure. It's a countertop reverse osmosis system. There's no plumber, no installation needed. You plug it in, it sits on your counter. And reverse osmosis is one of the most effective filtration methods for removing lead, PFAS, arsenic, and nitrates. So first thing in the morning when I'm filling up my kettle to make coffee, I use Cove Pure. It's got a touch screen where you pick the temperature you want, hot, cold, or warm, and it dispenses instantly. It also has preset cup sizes, so you can keep track of how much you're taking in. For America's 250th birthday, Cove Pure is giving you $250 off at covepure.com/BBM. That's COVEPURE.com/BBM. This podcast is brought to you by Factor. Eating well isn't a willpower problem for me, and it's probably not for you either. It's a setup problem. There's something healthy in the fridge that I should be making, and then it's 8 p.m. I've been at the track all weekend, or the workout went too long, and then the gap between should cook and will cook is roughly the size of the Grand Canyon. So if left to my own devices, I'll order something for delivery and feel great about it for approximately 11 minutes. That's the gap that Factor closes. Fully prepared meals designed by dietitians, made by chefs, delivered to your door, and they're ready in 2 minutes. No planning, no grocery run, no cooking. They've got meals built around whatever you're after, whether it's weight loss, more protein, overall healthy nutrition, GLP-1 support, and a Muscle Pro collection if you're training hard and you care about recovery. The food's fresh, never frozen, with over 100 meals rotated weekly, so you're not eating the same chicken and rice until you hate it. Lean proteins, whole foods, only the stuff you want, and it's pretty good too. Head over to factormeals.com/BBM50 off and use code BBM50 off to get 50% off and a free daily greens box. If that's something you're into, that's with new subscription only, while supplies last until September 27th, 2026. See the website for more details. Let's talk about the Cold War happening in your bed. No, not that. I'm talking about the temperature. One of you is a furnace and the other one's got cold feet like 2 blocks of ice. And somewhere around 2 a.m., somebody's stealing the covers and someone's throwing them off. Nobody's sleeping. Everyone's mad. The ChiliPad 2.0 actually solves this. It's a water-based mattress topper that controls your sleep temperature anywhere from 55 to 115 degrees, and the dual zones are the whole point. You run your side cold, your partner runs theirs warm, and the thermostat negotiations are over. It works with the mattress you already own, so you're not buying a whole new bed. And the new nightstand remote is pretty clever. Each side gets its own thermostat, and it's got sensors that notice when you actually get into bed and start your schedule for you. So it works even if you're the type who means well but forgets. There's no subscription. You buy it, you own it. It's got a 2-year warranty. It's designed and assembled in the USA, just north of Charlotte. And a cooler bed is one of the better supported ways to fall asleep faster. And honestly, I just stopped waking up annoyed and a little sweaty. Visit www.sleep, that's sleep.me/BBM to get up to $255 off your ChiliPad 2.0 with code BBM. Again, that's www.sleep.me/BBM. This is available for Barbell Medicine podcast listeners for a limited time. Order today and get free shipping and a 30-day sleep trial. Now, the scariest one in this whole episode, and the one with the most real science tangled up in it. Protein feeds cancer. I'm going to give you the strongest version of that case first because that's the version worth answering. When you eat protein, your body releases a hormone called insulin-like growth factor 1, IGF-1 for short. Now, this is a growth signal. It tells the cells to grow, to divide, and to hold off on dying. And a cancer, at its core, is a group of cells growing, dividing, and refusing to die on schedule. So a diet that keeps that growth signal turned up, the thinking goes, gives a tumor a friendlier place to live. Now, that's a real concern. IGF-1 is a real hormone doing a real thing, and serious scientists have spent careers on the link between it and cancer. If you're going to worry about protein, this is the most defensible place to do it. So let's go to the study this whole idea comes from, even though most people have never heard its name. It was published in 2014 in the journal Cell Metabolism, and it's the reason that protein causes cancer is out there in the first place. The headline's not made up, the finding is real, it just got badly misread. So here's what they did. They took a national U.S. health survey, about 6,300 adults over the age of 50, and asked each person to recall everything they ate one time for a single day. Then they followed those who died over the next 18 years, and they sorted those people into high protein groups, meaning that they ate 20% or more of their daily calories from protein, and they also classified them into moderate and low groups. And put that into real food. 20% of calories is about 100 grams of protein on a normal day for an average adult. That's a chicken breast, a cup of Greek yogurt, and a couple of eggs. The high protein group wasn't eating some carnivore mountain of meat. So let's think about that design for a second. A single day of eating, standing in for 18 years of a life. Whatever you happen to have for lunch on a Tuesday in 1994, treat it as your diet forever. Food recalls are kind of janky anyway, everybody knows that. But the deeper issue is what a one-day snapshot is even capturing. At best, it's a rough proxy for a person's overall dietary pattern, and that pattern is what really tracks with health. And here's the part nobody screenshots. When they looked at everyone over 50 together, higher protein had no link to dying of cancer at all. None. The scary number only shows up when they split the group by age. In the 50 to 65 band, the high protein eaters were about 4 times as likely to die of cancer. That's the number that started the panic. But 4 times as likely is a comparison, not your odds. If your baseline risk of cancer is small, 4 times a small number is still a small number. And that 4 is shaky on its own. Slice the study that thin, and the real range runs anywhere from about double up to 10 times. A range that wide means the study can't actually pin the number down. Then look at the other half of that same table in the same study. The people over 65. There, the effect doesn't just fade, it reverses. Over 65, the people eating the most protein had about 60% less death from cancer. The same diet that supposedly feeds tumors at 60 protects against them at 70. Now, a nutrient doesn't change its nature on your birthday. When one thing points in the opposite direction in 2 halves of the same data set, what you're looking at is noise or something else traveling along with the protein. And there's plenty that's also been traveling with protein. The risk only showed up for animal protein, never for plant protein. And realistically, the person eating a lot of animal protein in a survey like this is eating a lot of processed food and red meat, specifically processed red meat, as part of an overall low-quality diet. It's the whole dietary pattern. The fast food, the processed meat, everything clusters together. It's kind of like a Trojan horse. That person differs from somebody who's eating a lot of legumes in about 40 different ways besides just protein. Now, the authors also ran a mouse experiment to try to prove causation. And in the mice, low protein did slow tumor growth. But the low protein mouse diet was 4 to 7% protein, a level of near starvation that no human being can really eat. And they had injected the tumor cells directly into the animals. And the growth signal they pinned the whole thing on, IGF-1, in their own human data, it didn't carry the effect. When they tested whether IGF-1 was the thing actually linking protein to death, the numbers didn't support it. The mechanism they built the entire story on didn't show up in their own people. So what does this study actually show? That in one survey from one day of eating, animal protein tracked with more cancer death in one age group and less than another. That's the whole finding. And the authors themselves looked at their over 65 data and told older adults to eat more protein. The paper everyone cites to tell you to eat less protein tells a huge share of the population to eat more. Nobody screenshots that part. And if one messy survey doesn't settle it, we now have far better data. In 2020, the BMJ published a review of 32 studies and more than 700,000 people. Yeah, 700,000. Higher total protein tracked with lower death from all causes, and neither total nor animal protein was linked to cancer death at all. The only protein that looked protective was plant protein, which is really just a marker for a better overall diet. The largest and most recent look we have at this contradicts the scare. Now, I'm not going to pretend that there's nothing here. Processed and red meat really are linked to colon cancer. The World Health Organization, or WHO, calls processed meat a definite carcinogen and red meat a probable one. And the meta-analyses land around 18% higher colon cancer risk for every 50 grams of processed meat a day. That's about 2 slices of deli meat. To put that in real terms, your lifetime risk of colon cancer sits around 1 in 20, and an increase like that nudges it towards 1 in 17. That's a real bump, worth knowing about, and nowhere near the doubling that the word carcinogen makes people picture. And genetically higher IGF-1 does connect to modestly higher colon cancer risk, somewhere around 11 to 20%, and to almost nothing for most other types of cancers. So the mechanism is real, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise, but look closely at what that actually is. It is specific to processed and red meat, and it's probably more about the dietary pattern that comes with eating a lot of it rather than the meat molecule itself. The processing likely adds something, the curing, the nitrates, the way it's cooked, but nobody eating a mountain of processed meat is eating a great diet. Chicken, fish, eggs, dairy, whey, beans, lentils, none of them carry that colon cancer signal. And this is what pulls it all together. Your IGF-1 goes up for a lot of different reasons. Dietary protein raises it, lifting raises it, so does doing your cardio. So here's the tell. If a high IGF-1 by itself were quietly giving people cancer, then the 2 things that raise it the most, training and exercise, would raise your risk of cancer. Instead, though, they lower it. In nearly 1.5 million people, the most active ones had less cancer, including less colon cancer, the very cancer the IGF-1 story is telling you about. Yeah, that's observational too, but a study of 1.5 million people with the signal steady enough to survive adjusting for body size and other confounding variables, it's a different weight class from one day of a dietary recall. Two things can be true. Genes that hold your IGF-1 high across your whole life may carry that small colon cancer risk. Raising it for an afternoon by training and eating well is a completely different situation, carried along with everything else exercise does for you. So the real story is about how your IGF-1 got up and what came with it. Raise it by training and eating enough protein, and that's the version that travels with better health. Force it down on purpose, and you give up the muscle and bone you need as you age. The one place the risk actually shows up is a diet built on ultra-processed food and processed meat, which happens to carry a lot of protein along with it. So protein takes the blame for the company it keeps. Even taking the frightening evidence at face value, the finger points at that processed food pattern, while your chicken and your whey are just standing next to it. There are no biological free lunches, but there is no cancer in your chicken breast either. Now, the third fear is the one that feels the most like chemistry, which is exactly what makes it sound airtight. Protein is acidic. Your blood has to hold a very tight pH, a narrow range of acidity. So the story goes, when you flood your body with acid from a big steak, it reaches for the largest store of buffer it has, your skeleton, and it pulls calcium out of your bones to bring the acid back down. Do that for years, and you've quietly dissolved your own bones. It even has a name, the acid ash hypothesis, and it is the reason you've seen alkaline diets and alkaline water sold to protect your skeleton. And like the other claims made in this episode, this fear starts with something true. If you eat more protein, you're going to pass more calcium in your urine. You can measure it cleanly. More protein going in, more calcium going out. And that looks like a confession. Calcium is leaving the body, calcium lives in bone, so the bone must be dissolving. But here's where that falls apart. The researchers stopped looking only at the urine and measured the whole system, the total calcium balance for the body. The calcium didn't come out negative. A large review built to test this directly, across 55 studies, found that the extra calcium in the urine was not being pulled out of bone. A good part of it is there because protein helps you absorb more calcium from your food to begin with. More goes in, so more comes out the other end, and the whole body calcium stays steady. And when they went looking for the damage the theory predicts, the actual fractures, the actual bone loss, the intervention studies didn't find it. There is no mechanism that even works at the body's real pH, and the alkaline diets being sold to fix all this do nothing for your bones. They also don't make your blood alkaline because you would die otherwise. Now turn it around. If protein were really dissolving your skeleton, the people eating the most of it would have the worst bones. They have the opposite. The National Osteoporosis Foundation pooled 16 trials and 20 long-term studies, and higher protein came out neutral to good for bone, with a small protective edge at the spine and no harm anywhere else in the body. Their conclusion was that higher protein showed no adverse effects on the skeleton. And that makes sense once you remember what bone is. Bone is mostly a protein scaffold with minerals packed onto it. Starve that scaffold to spare the minerals, and you've protected nothing. Now, a few caveats here because I'm not going to oversell this. The fracture data isn't as great as the bone density data. We don't have large, long trials counting broken hips. The effects are modest. And the protein doesn't work alone. It needs calcium, it needs vitamin D, and more than anything, it needs you to load the skeleton by actually moving and lifting weights. The one place that a critic still has ground is very high protein intake paired with almost no calcium, which is not how most people eat. But the evidence says the opposite. Protein supports your bones. If anything, your skeleton is asking for more of it. Now, the fourth scare is the one that sounds the most scientific because it comes dressed in a lab coat. Your body, it says, can only use 20 or 30 grams of protein at a meal, and anything past that is wasted, burned off, passed in your urine, or in the scary version, stored as body fat. So the big steak or the 100-gram shake is money just going down the toilet. This protein cap isn't invented. It comes from real research. Researchers fed 10, 20, and 40 grams of protein after training a single muscle group, and the muscle building response, what we call muscle protein synthesis, leveled off at around 20 grams. Past that, the extra amino acids from the protein were burned for energy. So for building muscle in the couple hours after you train one muscle, about 20 grams of protein really is close to the ceiling. That's a real result, and I'm not going to brush it aside. But then people took the muscle building response levels off and quietly turned it into your body can't use the rest, which is a completely different claim. Two things falsify this. The first is that the ceiling was measured after training one muscle group. If you train your whole body, the ceiling rises. When you feed people 40 grams of protein after a full body session, 40 beats 20, because the amount of protein your body can put to work tracks how much muscle you just trained. The second is that burning amino acids for energy is simply your body using them for fuel, which is a long way from wasted and further still from stored as fat. A group in the Netherlands tested the real question in 2023 in one of the more elegant feeding studies I've read. They gave people either 25 grams of protein or 100, and then, using tagged amino acids they could follow around through the body, they watched what happened for a full 12 hours and beyond. The 100-gram meal did not hit a wall. It produced a larger building response and a longer one. The body used more of it and kept using it deep into the night. Almost none of it was burned off. None of it was wasted. Now, in fairness, this was measured after a workout in young people, and spreading your protein across the day still probably has a small advantage for building muscle specifically. So timing is a fine detail if you're chasing every last percent of gains. But is the big meal wasted? No. Your body holds onto that protein and puts it to work over the hours that follow. There is no trapdoor that dumps the extra. Okay, so far the kidneys are fine. The cancer scare is really about processed meat and the dietary pattern. The bone scare has it backwards, and the 30-gram cap is imaginary. So if the ceiling is a myth, let's talk about what protein actually does for you, because it does earn its reputation, just for different reasons than the label on the tub implies. If you heard the calories in, calories out episode, I promised you the long version of this, so here it is. The story you've probably heard is that protein is uniquely filling or satiating, that it flips some switch and you eat less without even trying. And there's a grain of truth here. Protein does raise your fullness hormones a little in the short term. But when researchers actually measure whether that makes you eat less in the next meal, the effect gets slippery. Sometimes it's there, but plenty of times it's not. Fullness is real for the next hour or so, but unreliable otherwise. So here's my read of the research, and it's probably a little different from what you've heard. Protein does help you eat less, but the reason is way more simple than it's a magic fullness switch. It crowds your plate. When a real portion of your meal is chicken or Greek yogurt or eggs, that is physical space and calories that a pile of hyperpalatable, easy to overeat food never gets to occupy. The protein is just taking the seat the cookies wanted. And the thermic effect idea, that protein costs more energy, more calories to digest, and so it revs up your metabolism, yeah, I covered it in the calories episode, so here's a short version. It's real, and it's mostly a rounding error. If you push your protein way up, your total daily burn barely moves. Don't eat protein for the calorie math. It doesn't really pay off. Here's what protein actually gets you, and it's the one benefit that holds up well when you look at the evidence. When you lose weight, some of what comes off is muscle. If you eat more protein while you diet, you're going to hold on to more of that muscle. A meta-analysis of 24 weight loss trials found that the higher protein groups kept a little under half a kilogram more lean mass, bit over a pound, and lost slightly more fat. Now, to be fair, that is only a modest effect, and the margin of error runs close to zero. Still, it's a real worthwhile edge, especially when paired with resistance training that shows up over months, well short of a body recomposition miracle. And it comes with the catch the supplement aisle will never print on the label. Protein only protects muscle if you're actually asking that muscle to do something. Without resistance training, the extra protein mostly just goes along for the ride. You can't supplement your way into muscle you don't train. Think of muscle as a bank account. Protein is the deposit, and training is what keeps the account open. So let's put the whole thing back together. In a healthy adult, protein doesn't really touch the kidneys. In a sick kidney, it becomes a careful conversation with a nephrologist, decided in a clinic rather than off of a headline. The cancer scare is one day of food pointing one way at 60 and reversing by 70, from the very study that turned around and told older adults to eat more protein. And where a real cancer signal exists, it's about processed meat in the colon, a modest effect that tracks with what is on the plate more than the protein itself. The bone scare has it backwards because your skeleton is built from protein and does better with more of it. The 30-gram cap has no trapdoor behind it, and the one real thing protein buys you, holding on to muscle while you lose fat, only shows up if you lift weights. So back to that screenshot, the one somebody who cares about you is probably going to send. They're not dumb and they're not necessarily lying. They read a real headline built on a real mechanism. They just got the dose wrong and the person wrong and usually the direction wrong. The amount of protein that would threaten a healthy adult is simply not a number you're going to really reach from eating an actual healthy diet. Which leaves the only question that actually matters. Everybody wants to know if they're eating too much protein. Almost nobody is. The amount that could actually harm you is a ceiling so high you couldn't touch it if you jumped. But the opposite claim, that everyone should be eating more protein, well, that's not true either. The average American adult already eats well over the old minimum of 0.8. They eat a bit more than 1 gram of protein per kilogram body weight per day. If you're not training, that's already plenty. You don't need to chase more. Where more protein does earn its keep is when you lift weights. The intake that best supports your muscle and your bone, paired with training, sits higher, around 1.4 to 1.6 grams of protein per kilogram total body weight. And that's where a lot of people who actually lift turn out to be short. And this is the part that the protein marketing machine leaves out. For most people, when eating more protein seems to help, the protein itself is usually not the reason. What actually happened is that you swapped a pile of ultra-processed food that happened to be high in protein instead for lean, minimally processed protein like chicken, fish, eggs, dairy, beans, and you ate fewer total calories doing it. The number on the label went up, but what helped you was better food and less of it. So here's your homework. Go find out what you actually eat in a day, the real number measured. If you train, compare it against that 1.4 to 1.6 grams per kilogram body weight per day target, and you may be short. But if you're not, your protein level is almost certainly fine. And the better use of your attention is the quality of your food. But that's the small version of a much bigger point. The two things that actually decide your health here have nothing to do with the protein number. Is your diet mostly real food? Are you doing something with your body? Everything that people scream about with protein sits downstream of those two. So let's quit asking how much protein, ask what is on your plate, and ask what are you doing with it. I'm Dr. Jordan Feigenbaum, and this has been the Barbell Medicine Podcast.